All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We'll go alphabetically by last name, because that's how I have them on my sheet. So Julie Winkle Giulioni is passionate about ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to learn, grow, and develop their potential so they can fully engage in work and life. She's the co-author of the Amazon and Washington Post bestseller, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, Career Conversations Organizations Need and Employees Want. And she's been identified by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers. We're also joined by Dr. Beverly Kay, who's recognized internationally as one of the most knowledgeable and practical professionals in the areas of career development, employee engagement, and retention. In 2018, ATD, the Association for Talent Development, honored Bev with the Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing her advanced knowledge, extensive practice across the talent development field, her thought leadership, and contributions to the profession. And she was recognized in 2019 by the Institute for Management Studies with its Lifetime Achievement Award. And she's the co-author with Julie of Help Them Grow and Watch Them Go, and also of Up Is Not the Only Way, and many other books as well. And finally, Anna Leinberger is the acquiring editor at Barrett Kohler, whose acquisition niches include communication, intercultural consulting, female authors, and international current events, including many of you on this call as well. She studied classics, but not English Lit, and worked internationally before returning to the States and pursuing a career in media and social justice. Outside of BK, she serves on the board of the Meta Center for Nonviolence in Petaluma, California. She's an avid hiker and sails in the Bay. So welcome to Julie, Bev, and Anna. We're thrilled that you're here.
Thank you.
So I think the way we'll work this morning, as we've done for our other calls, is please put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring them and serving them up to Julie, to Bev, and to Anna. And I've got a few questions of my own to start with. So why don't I ask each of you to provide a brief overview of your experience with book-related revenue-generating projects, excuse me. Julie, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So I've been in the training arena since, before I'm willing to cop to. And my last internal job was the director of product development for Achieve Global, which at the time was the largest training company in the world. And so I led the teams that created the leadership, sales, and service products that many of which are still in use today. And so about 20 years ago, I went out on my own and formed a niche consulting firm. And the focus really was on training development, instructional design, working both with corporations and with authors, turning their IP into training products. So I had the pleasure of working with Linda Galindo and Sam Slapp, and that's, of course, the context within which I met Bev. And ultimately had the great pleasure of working with her and with her writing Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And so I was able to then begin kind of diagnosing and being the physician to myself as I began developing training products that would support Help Them Grow. First, by myself with Bev, and then we had the great fortune to work with Anna. I'm going to let her talk about the work that we did together. So anyway, my product focus is really on training, and I've got, and as we talk about it, you'll hear kind of a bias toward a train the trainer model where we can transfer our technology to others and in the process be able to scale and magnify our messages.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Bev, how about you?
So I will date myself and say that I started when paper was popular for products, and I know a lot of you remember those days. I actually published my first book in 1982. And it was titled Up Is Not the Only Way. So I've been singing that song, BJ, I think you can remember, for like 40 years. And my second book was published by Josie Bass, and Steve Frasante was the editor. And those two books were both on an HR, an OD approach to career development. So I really started in the productizing business very early. I started when Blessing White was out there and when a lot of the oldies but goodies were out there. And I produced, I have a show and tell, cards before cards became popular, a feedback wheel that you turn so you know how to give feedback, and many, many, many paper instruments along with face-to-face workshops. So that got me into the product life. And then with each book, with Julie, of course, we did a number of products with Sharon Jordan Evans, a number of products, and I'll talk about those later. And each book, once I realized that the dollars to be made were not from the books to be sold, but from the workshops and speeches and products that went with those books. So the only product stream that started prior to a book was all the career development work. So that's it.
Great.
For now.
Thank you. And Anna, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I have a very different background in getting into this since I haven't created my own for, I'm a book editor, not a consultant with my own methodology. But I came to Berrett-Koehler initially with a background in education. My first job straight out of college was actually to help found King's Academy, which is the first boarding school in the Middle East. It was founded by King Abdullah, and creating a curriculum from scratch over there gave me sort of like a straight into the deep end experience with curriculum design, activity design, what is generally referred to as instructional design. So basically just figuring out how to create activities that facilitate learning of some kind. And so when I got to Berrett-Koehler, we actually sort of serendipitously got into the actual publishing of these we call them ancillary products, because Richard Leiter had a card deck that he had sort of self-published, and he was doing all the fulfillment for himself. He had boxes and boxes and boxes of these in like a spare office or something, and every time someone wanted some, his assistant would just mail them out. And he was like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. So he came to Berrett-Koehler and was like, well, would you guys consider, publishing this, and you can do all of that? And we were like, oh yeah, absolutely. And I kind of jumped onto that project because of my background. And, these products are very context sensitive. So Berrett-Koehler can't do, one for every single book. We have to choose very carefully which ones make sense for us to do versus which ones would make sense for an author to do. But whenever we have the opportunity, I've been working on those, and Berrett-Koehler has now done, I want to say 5-ish card decks and a workbook. We're working on another workbook at the moment that'll be published in early 2021, possibly another card deck. So yeah, I've just basically, for all of these different projects, every single one is individual. How we approach each project is completely different, which I've really loved because, of course, it gets me thinking creatively and inventing new things and not just following the same mold for every single project. So that's a little bit of how I got into all of this.
Yeah. So this sort of begs the question, which is like, why bother with all of this productizing RIP? What are your thoughts? Anna, you want to start?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. So I would say, why bother? I would almost answer that with another question. And I would say, what are you planning to use it for? How are you going to use it? I think the wrong approach to this is to simply decide more is better, or more diversity of product, format is better. But if you have a really specific goal in mind, and you think that there is a way that a different format of product can facilitate learning for your clients, then that's why I would bother.
Yeah, super helpful. So Bev, I'm passing the virtual mic to you. What's your thought?
I hate to say it, the why bother is there are dollars to be had in your products. And VJ, I see you smiling. So because I was already into products with my own practice in career development, it was a natural to think book and product simultaneously. It also allows you to be places that you can't be, to train trainers, etc., to go global, even before global was popular, and to spice up the workshops with, in my time, and I still love it, the touchy-feely product. So with each book, there was a touchy-feely workshop-y product to go with it. Now they're all online. Mm-hmm. But I love the touchy-feely ones, the best.
There's all sorts of learners too, right? I think it certainly helps people to learn that way. Julie, any thoughts on the why bother question?
Yeah, I mean, really three things from my perspective. One is it's fun. We get to keep playing with and advancing and kind of spinning the ideas that are in the book. It's always stuff that can't fit in the book, or new ideas that evolve after you send in that final manuscript. And it's a way just to keep having fun in that content space, I find, at least. It makes it kind of takes your change making ability to the next level. It amplifies your message in a different way. And kind of playing off what Bev said, I think it provides us freedom. When you productize your IP, you don't have to be the constant messenger out there. And if you can create something that stands on its own, it kind of takes on a life of its own and lets you go live your life more fully.
Yeah. So Don has asked an excellent question, which is, how are you pivoting with the push to virtual interactions?
We, like all of you, are turning all our wonderful touchy products into equally wonderful non-touchy products that are online. And the pivot is essential. There are clients who still want, not right now, but there always were clients who still wanted the classroom events. And I don't know what will happen when COVID goes away, which it will. And but I think it's going with the times and getting more technical in our presentations.
Yeah, I would second that. A lot of my instructor-led face-to-face work has been shifted to virtual, so we're turning those live learning experiences not into webinars. We're trying to kind of exercise that from everybody's lexicon, because the learning needs to move forward into the virtual environment. And so we're creating virtual learning experiences. I'm also working with a lot of clients to create a lot more video than we had in the past, which is a way to get the message out there with fidelity through virtual means. And also playing with more on demand. So pulling the podcasts, the videos, the articles, and those sorts of things together into on-demand repositories that allow for self-service learning. And then I'm starting to play in the space of games. And I don't mean like capital G games. We're talking real lowercase games. But turning, like Bev, I'm a real lover of the cards, turning some of these card activities into virtual games where 4 players can log in together and play the game together. Sort of like, many of us are doing, with Jackbox and that kind of thing over Zoom with our families and friends. It's a great question, Dawn. I think we all need to be, thinking and exchanging these ideas.
Yeah, it is. In my own experience, what I've seen and what we've been doing is we've been doing sort of a hybrid where when we know and our client will give us the names of the participants ahead of time, we actually mail them a little box ahead of our training so that they have something to open and touch during the training, and they get a little bit of the hybrid as well. All right, well, let's move to Anna. This question, I want to hear from you first. In your experience with what BK has been doing, what have you seen as the effective characteristics of the products that have worked and those that haven't?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, honestly, the thing that makes one of these products work is sort of 2-tiered. And like everything else in book publishing and marketing, the first tier is, what are you doing as an author to get it into people's hands? The one thing that's really important about these products to keep in mind is that they are not like books in that they have virtually no chance of organic spread. People do not go into bookstores to browse for, card decks to help them with personal productivity. They go in for books. They go in because they heard about a book from a particular author. These products, and I mean, everyone here, I'm sure, has read Steve's 10 Awful Truths about the book publishing industry. And if you just take all of that advice and then like intensify it a couple of levels, that's kind of the where you're playing with these ancillary products, is that they really are going to have to flow through what the author is doing. And so that initial card deck that we did with Richard Leiter has been incredibly successful, but it's because he plugs it every chance he gets. It is mentioned in one of his books where the content kind of overlaps with it. He actually references the exercise that he used to develop the card deck and says, like, there's a card deck, this is what it's called. Of course, when we do these, not packages, but when we do a book with a card deck that works in tandem with the content, we'll put a page in the back of the book saying, oh, there's a card deck. And so really it's about, are you as the author using it in the course of your business? So the more you're using it, the more it will actually sort of flow and people will want it. But like success in terms of numbers sold is a metric that, I would say is highly dependent on the author. And so the products that we have used where the author has made a very intentional push to use those in the course of their business and just plug it whenever they can, those tend to sell more than ones where the author is not actually using it. And then of course the second tier is that it does have to be a good product. It has to be an engaging activity. It has to add value. It can't be just sort of a rehash of what you can get from the book. You have to get something out of it. But sadly, that is sort of second tier to whether or not the author is doing a lot to get it out there.
Can I add just a couple of things? Mort Chavitz, some of you know me, some of you don't. My last book was with Ken Blanchard. It's called Refire, Don't Retire. And you're talking about products, and I think that means kind of workshops of some kind. And there are a couple of 3 advantages for doing them. One is, if you do enough of them, you can kind of trademark it, which means that it's more difficult to rip it off. The second thing is, doing a virtual workshop is really different from doing an in-person workshop. workshop. So for those of you who are going to do those, you're going to have to learn another skill set, because talking to people and having them interact around you is very different from looking into a camera and trying to project. It's different. How you take material, how you present material is different, and it's worthwhile coming up to speed about that. And it may be that a workshop, maybe BK does it, a workshop on how to do virtual workshops would be something that could be of value to a bunch of people.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. Let's move into, we are talking about workshops, but I know there's also a little show and tell. So I'm wondering, Bev, Julie, Anna, if you have a little bit of show and tell. Esther says, by the way, we will be publishing an interview with someone who specializes in virtual learning design on the Fall Authors Inc. Thanks, Esther, so much for that as well. So let's do a little show and tell about the IP, the products that have worked for you.
Okay, I ran around my office pulling things, so I'm willing to start. I just want to add to your last question, characteristics of an effective derivative product.
Yeah.
I have always operated out of a concept I call my 4 Ds, that every product has to be deceptively simple, meaning research-based, but any manager or employee has to be able to say, that doesn't look so hard, I could do that. It has to be delightfully engaging. In other words, makes you smile. It has to be deliberately flexible, meaning if the client wants it shrunk, you can shrink it. And it has to be decidedly business-centric. So if the product meets those 4 Ds, I know it has a chance. So some products that have worked, because they're still out there, are the love 'em or lose 'em products. So those were done with the book with an eye to, we need workshops and products. So, and now we're into the 6th edition of Love 'em. So it'll make it out there for 20 years. So they were brief surveys, like this is the retention deficit disorder, which is really how big a jerk are you? And it has our jerk characteristics, and it, and it's fun. And of course, we do it to managers by saying, have you ever worked for a jerk? What was that like? So that it's not immediately them. The product we built for career development and carried into every other product was values, which is probably almost 40 years old, which has stickers and money little tabs that you put on it. Now it's all online. Here's one that did not sell as well. It was a love 'em or lose 'em ThinkPad activity, which had a deck of cards, which you sorted a number of ways, and then 12 ways to sort the cards. And we even had a coupon book, which allowed a manager to say, you did a great job, here's a coupon. And the coupons matched the book. And, a run the numbers instrument that said, how much money are you losing? And then, of course, the workshops and the facilitators' guides that went through a number of iterations and CDs and, once a day focus things. So the creativity was there. the dollars involved on shipping and warehousing and all of that costs a ton of money. But I'm gonna leave Help Them Grow. But Julie, if you don't have a couple products nearby, I do. And I'll just show you the difference in Hello Stay interviews. There was a smaller workbook and a manager field book to go with it. So you could find what you needed really quickly. For Love It, Don't Leave It, there was a sketch pad called Satisfaction Power with the whole workshop built into like a steno pad. So you can see that I loved touchy-feely things, and I still do. So that's just some of the show and tell. I'll leave Julie to talk about Help Them Grow.
And a couple other things maybe. So when Bev and I first wrote Help Them Grow back in 2012, we had this idea that, you know, the idea of having these ongoing conversations, it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of developing a new habit. And so how do we help people do that? It's a day by day sort of thing. So we created this desk calendar with 90 or like 3 months worth of questions, one a day, and little quotes, and, you know, quite inspirational and really a cute little deliverable. You know, we may say so ourselves. The sales were kind of lackluster. Folks didn't really pick up on it the way we thought they should. And I was, you know, talking to my kids about it. And if any of you have teenagers or kids in their 20s, this will sound very familiar. And so I was saying, you know, like, what's the deal? You know, it's so cute. And my son looked at me and he said, "Oh yeah, Mom, the 80s called and they want their Rolodex back too." And so, you know, after I sent him to his room, I did a little reflection, and I kind of got why this wasn't the form that was resonating, you know, necessarily with the millennials. And so did some thinking about that and trying to think, you know, what's the 21st century equivalent of the Rolodex and the desk calendar, and turned it instead into a phone app. Does the exact same thing, pings the manager every day with a different question so that they can just get into that habit. Simple. I mean, this has got really rudimentary, but it's really engaging for folks. And a small thing like this that didn't cost that much on my part, it's a great auxiliary piece for the workshops that I do. When I speak and mention this, immediately people pull out their phones and they're getting it. There's a little bit of a weird cool factor and some credibility that goes with something like this. The other thing that, Dawn, you were asking about the platforms. And one of the things that I realized, and you all probably find yourself in the same boat, we've got all of these assets floating around. We've got articles, we've got podcasts, we've got videos. I mean, we've got all of this great stuff. And I felt like I was spending half my day finding and sending people stuff. And so what I finally, Lisa, would it be okay if I shared my screen?
Sure, go for it. You know what?
Does that work?
Is that enabled, Christelle?
I'm going to just take the reins and try.
Yep, there we go.
Okay,
perfect.
All right. So what I decided to do was and Dawn, you know, platform is probably an overstatement for what I've done. I brought everything together into what I call the eGrow system, like ecosystem of learning resources, but all in one place. And it's just a website that my web guide put together. I was able to pull together, you know, some of the short podcasts that, you know, relate to this topic, some of the articles and blogs that I had written, some of the videos that support the content area. And so now I have this eGrow system, which I can use because, you know, in the training, the custom training that I do, I don't want it to be a one and done sort of experience. So this is something that I sell along with any of the workshops. so that clients have a sustainment strategy, and they can either send their people here and just, you know, be done with it, and they've got this repository of content to keep going through. Or a lot of the clients will create a kind of a feed system, and they'll pull out the ones they're most interested in and feed it to people sort of over time, and it creates an extension of the learning. And so Dawn, you also had a question about pricing. So I, you know, include this in the pricing, the per person pricing of a workshop. Or sometimes clients just want these assets, and so then, you know, I can either piece them out and price them individually, or just give them, you know, kind of enterprise licensing to the resources. And then the last thing, you know, Bev and I were just destined to do something together. We, you know, we love onomatopoeia. We love lists that start with the same letter, and we love our cards. You know, anytime I can figure out a way to use a card, I'll do that. You know, and if you're not a real card lover, they're so versatile, both virtually and, you know, in real life, because we'll get back together, you know, with people again at some point. But there are great ways to do assessments, to acquire information, to apply skills and that kind of thing. But early on in my custom workshops, I created, you know, just these little help them grow question cards, and people could do a self-assessment, figure out what their go-to questioning style was. And then we would play hindsight headbands, and we'd have people put a headband on and a question, and they'd have to go around and people would ask them that question. Because Esther, one of the questions you put in the in chat was, how do you think about choosing the content for the workshop? From my perspective, it's where the ideas in the book stop and people need to start taking action and applying it. Because there's only so much you can take in through the read. So when it comes to having these kinds of conversations, you got to move your mouth. You got to ask the questions. You got to see people's reactions. You got to be able to formulate a response. And so that's typically the sweet spot I find in any author's work that's really ripe for the training. So anyway, these were cute little cards, and they worked, you know, fine for what I was doing. But then when Bev and I were talking to Anna about, you know, what else we could do with Help Them Grow, well, God bless Anna, because she took my funky little cards and turned them into this beautiful deck, which, I don't know, Anna, do you want to talk about this process a little bit? Because we love what you did.
Sure, yeah. So I guess the main difference here that I also want to point out is that there is a very different process between when you're making some kind of tool that you are primarily going to be just you know, what we would call distributing, but, you know, it's not going through a publisher, it's not stocked in warehouses, you don't have the publisher with, like, you know, a print run or anything, you know, just basic consultant stuff. Like, you have your workbooks, all of your materials that you create and produce on your own. And that is actually a great and probably the best way to start doing this sort of thing. You wouldn't want to try and do one of these things with, say, a publisher as your first, as your dry run. You usually want to get used to how these things are going to be involved in your business and how you're going to be using them before you would go with a publisher. So, you know, you're not dealing with necessarily different approaches to the content creation, but it is a much more formalized process if you're going to end up doing something that's to accompany a published book with a publisher. And so basically what we did was we looked at the card deck that already existed and wanted to just kind of bump it up a little bit, honestly, because when you're creating a little card deck that you're doing yourself, it's going to be shorter. I think the card deck had, your card deck had, you know, maybe like 25, 30 cards in it. Whereas, you know, when we're looking for like a bigger product, it's going to be pretty standard, like a 56 card deck. So the first thing was we just needed to expand the exercise, which, you know, that's really great because as I think both Bev and Julie have said, you have a lot of content already. And so you're just pouring it into a new form. So that was kind of the first thing. And then the second is you really want to multi-function the exercise. And actually, I'm sorry, I'm realizing I'm getting pigeonholed into card decks because that's what we're talking about here. And this would be very different if you were talking about like a workbook or some kind of toolkit sheet for people to fill in. All of those development processes would be very different. But for this deck in particular, what we tried to do was make sure that the bulk of the cards with some kind of I don't know, thought generator, like a keyword. It can be anything. It can be a piece of advice. It can be like a brainstorming prompt. In the case of Richard Leiter's deck, it was just like characteristics, and you had to decide whether you resonated with them or not. And so you want to make the bulk of the card something like that. And then the goal is to create multiple different exercises for how to use that same set of data on the different cards. And so that's really what we did. And I think we came up with, something like somewhere between 4 and 6, I think, for your deck. And you can just use them in all these different ways. And then of course you have to write out the instructions in some way. But yeah.
Well, and given Bev's creativity, we could have come up with 84 different ways to use those darn cards.
Yeah. A couple quick comments. One is that there's a question in the chat. I don't want to use our group time to talk about it, but Jeannie has asked about a platform for engagement. Having been on many of these calls, we could have a whole discussion on the different platforms, but if others have thoughts in the chat and you want to respond to Jeannie on that, please do so. In terms of the online products, when in the life cycle of your book is a good time to launch the product? And when is a bad time in the life cycle of your book launch and book, kind of out there in the ether? When is a good time and a bad time to be launching these things? Any thoughts?
I would say semi-simultaneously, like
Okay.
not when the book comes out and you're really wanting to ramp up the purchase of those books. But then as that period is over and you're getting into actually delivering on the message of the book, you better have those materials ready to go. And that's not easy because we all know what it takes just to get that book out and do that launch week. So you have to back it up and really start early. And starting early is hard.
Yes, it is.
Well, and Bev, you started your business with training that probably informed your book. So, I mean, talk about starting early. You were literally, I would imagine, workshopping some of your product.
Right.
So that's a smart way to go too, is then you've got it in place and that's informing the real needs. You're taking the questions people have and what resonates, turn into the book.
Right.
So Brian's asked a question here. What's the market for these add-on products? And what would you say, and would you say it's been growing or shrinking over the past 20 years?
The market. Ask that question again.
Sure. What's the market for these add-on products? And would you say it's been growing or shrinking over the past 20 years?
So it probably depends upon, we're talking about such a broad swath of products, everything from cards to workshops to apps to everything. So it probably depends, in terms of the technology enabled stuff, that's probably on a growth trajectory. It feels to me like despite the pandemic and the business downturn, that the workshop business is still out there, that feels like it's holding steady, although taking a different, form. I'm not sure about the extras, the cards and that sort of thing. I might defer to Bev and Anna on that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I have the data, but the last, 5 to 8 years, when everything has been going virtual, the tactile product is not used as much. And I don't know if we'll go back to face-to-face. It will make me very sad, but we may not.
Lisa and Bev, BJ just wrote, the market for these products depends on the subject matter. And I think that's probably,
That's true.
you know, really true. You know, there's some topics that become more or less important depending upon what's going on.
Yeah,
Right.
and she shared as a build on to that she's got a diversity assessment that's been increasing in sales over the past few years. Yeah, certainly certainly in the past few months as well. So let's shift a little bit to lessons learned. So what has been the biggest mistakes that you've made, or what do you see as the biggest challenges in productizing your IP?
I'm happy to jump in first.
Great.
I've made plenty of mistakes. I think kind of the two that immediately come to mind is, and I learned this early on, expecting that your core message is going to translate through others can be, with fidelity, is a mistake. I was working with an author who was a big personality, and he had this kind of in-your-face confrontational way about him, but it also came with heart. And he created magic when he did his workshops, and translating his words. Somebody else could have said the exact same words, and it didn't have the same impact. And so I think one of the things that as authors we need to think about is, what's another way to get that point across? How through exercises can we have people arrive at that same kind of heart-pounding place, but get them to it a slightly different way? So just, you know, knowing that nobody's got your magic and passion and conviction. And so we've got to embed that in others differently. And then the other thing is, years ago, I was doing a project for a firm, and they had written a book on helping men sell to women. They were trying to help men understand how they were screwing it up and how to better connect with women and perform better like that. They were scaling different industries. They were actually writing books, how to do this in financial services, cars, fascinating business. Anyway, long story short, we were hired to do the training on it. And what I realized, the learning that I got there, is that while simplicity is the goal, it's not always possible, and it's not always the best solution. Because, you know, what we needed to do was knock these cocky guys off their game a little bit. And that's hard, you know, think about a car salesman and I don't, not to, that was bad. Ignore everything I just said. Knock these cocky guys off their game. But then we also had to have them practice how to do this. And can you imagine, you know, my model was 3 people in a trio. One of these guys is going to act like a woman while the other guy sells to, I mean, it was just, I couldn't make it work. For 2 weeks, I didn't sleep, and I stressed over this. And I finally got on a plane, went to Florida with the check in hand to give them the retainer back, because I just couldn't do this. It wasn't going to work. And they were like, oh, wait, what would it take? And I said, well, what it's going to take is that we have somebody go in and secret shop each of these guys and catch them doing all this stuff. And then during the workshop, we need those women to walk in, shock these guys out of their skin, and then sit down and give them that feedback and tell them how they felt and have them practice a different way of doing it. And they said, okay, let's do that. And it was absolutely a game changer. But because I had this idea that it had to be simple and follow a formula, I almost lost the business and blew it for them. So I guess the lesson there is, you know, it might have to be really out of the box, and it might look a lot different, and it might be a little hard. And that might be what it takes to replicate your message and turn it into the kind of action and behavior change that you're hoping that your book will do.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other lessons learned? Bev, Anna?
One for me, and it might bleed into the next question, is having a sales team. So one of the ways that we grew was we had a substantial full-time sales team. And, you know, I think best of you know, I sold my company to 2 of my employees about 2.5 years ago. What I'm happiest they now have is don't tell the sales, running the sales team. So I'll tell you, we invested a lot time and effort in what we called Career Power 3.0. Move your career from maps to apps. And we talked about 5 different apps, and we developed an entirely new, and this was still in the day of paper, program that ran in a different way. It was really using people in the class to teach each other. And the facilitator had less of a role. I forgot what year this was, 2010, but it was ahead of its time. And the reason I say that, and it was a bad move on my part as the leader, we spent a lot, we rolled it out, we you know, checked it out, and one of the early deliveries of the salesperson whose client it was said, it didn't work. Let's not sell it anymore. And she convinced the entire sales team that it should be stopped. And I let that happen. And so maybe there were some issues with the product and the apps, maps to apps. Maybe I just didn't get in there and fix it. But a sales team and salespeople, for those of you who go that route, are wonderful in selling and hard to manage and hard to keep on your team the way you want it. So so that was a mistake. And to this day, you know, I look at it, I clutch it to me, and I say, how can I make use of this? And we have made use of the content, but not the product so much itself. So that's like a combination of learnings and challenges.
Yeah, helpful. Thank you.
BJ, stop smiling. So,
Anna, any words of guidance? Oh, I'm sorry, Bev. Was there something else that you wanted to add?
No.
Nope. Was someone else? Nope. Okay. Yeah, I would say something that's sort of very much in line with what Bev just said, which is getting distracted by the value you think something should add to somebody instead of the value that they think they need, because they're going to buy the thing that they think they need. You will have to be fighting an uphill battle to convince them that what you think they need is what they need if they don't already know that. And so that's, you know, very true of, I think, just about any ancillary product, but even any book, any workshop. So in doing your development, I think with these products, it can be even more tempting because you know what these tools can do for people once they, you know, buy into them. But you can't lose that piece of really starting from some place where you see a need that people are already expressing some level of recognition. Oh, that would be really useful for me.
Right. Right.
Yeah, BJ points out there's a difference between what people want and what they need. That's quite true. So what, anything else on the cautions, challenges, or considerations? Julie, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
You know, maybe just being aware of unbridled enthusiasm when it comes to production. You know, back to my love of cards, I made these other little cards and around curiosity. Bev and I have done a lot of work in that space, and it was for a client implementation, and the printer offered me this great deal on a volume. And it was such a great, you know, little piece. I figured everybody's going to want it, you know, so, you know, what could go wrong? And you can ask my husband, because we've got boxes of these cards in the garage. So just being a little bit realistic, especially early on, and not jumping in with both feet, probably.
And you know, I'll tell you, it reminds me of one other. We developed a career product for a large organization, and we tailored it. And they said it was a large box with all the materials in it. And they said, we can't house it. Can you house it in your warehouse? And we did. And then eventually they said, well, we don't think we've changed they actually changed their name. They did. And they said, we don't want them anymore. And we had 2,000 of them printed in our warehouse, and they said, get rid of them. They didn't pay for them, and I wanted to turn them into something, and they would not let us turn it into anything, or I wanted to give it away to charity. It was still a great career project, and they wouldn't let us. And we had to burn 2,000 products, which broke my heart. Yeah. So there's a lot of legality as you build your product that I think we didn't get advice on when we should have.
That's helpful. Thank you. Catherine's asked a question. I want to, in a minute, I want to just to prime Bev, Julie, and Anna to ask you for your kind of final one piece of advice on this. But in the meantime, there's a question from Catherine about global strategy and implications, especially for physical products. Is that something that any of you have experience or thoughts on?
Yeah. Go ahead, Beth.
No, go, Julie.
All right. As I've worked with global clients, you know, certainly having the book in different languages in foreign publishers is super helpful, and so they can, you know, get the book that way. But transferring, you know, workbooks and cards and all of that becomes very cumbersome. So particularly with international clients, I've gravitated toward PDF writable workbooks, you know, digital workbooks that have the content and then the space for the exercises and that sort of thing. And increasingly, you know, of course, e-learning is a great way to go, and there are easy ways to translate that. You have to be planful about that. So if you're thinking about, you know, e-learning or frankly, any product, you want to be thinking about it as you create it in English or whatever the native language is. Be planful about that, because you've got to leave space and time for translations and that sort of thing. But yeah, physically mailing stuff around just is pretty cumbersome these days.
Yeah, for sure.
And
okay, go ahead, Bev.
There are just all kinds of problems in shipping the product or giving it to the client to print themselves. There are very costly translation costs, etc. So it's an easy way to get yourself in a hole. It is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, lightning round. One piece of advice for people who are considering productizing their IP. Anna, why don't we start with you?
I would say be flexible and be willing to iterate. So try something out on a small scale and see how it works. You know, if you already do workshops, use your workshops to test out a product. Don't go the whole, you know, on print run situation at the very beginning. Do things small before you go big.
Thank you. Julie.
Yeah, it's the anti-field of dreams advice. Don't build it and expect that they're going to come. Really let a client's needs and wants drive and inform what you create, and build it on their nickel. And then, you know, it can become more elegant over time.
Beautiful. And
And
Bev?
if you can't build it on their nickel, watch your own nickel, because they really add up. And it is very disappointing to have invested beaucoup bucks and it not work the way you thought it would. So I wish everybody good luck. Go for it.
Well, sage advice from our experts, Bev Kay, Julie Winkle-Giulioni, and Anna Lineberger. Thank you all so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom. You're getting some virtual reactions and claps as well. Yes, with a nice round of applause. Really appreciate your easy yes and your willingness to do this, and your patience as we got you on the schedule after the marketing retreat. Don't forget to email Julie if you're interested in participating in next year's marketing retreat. Mark your calendars for September 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern for the next session with Stuart Levine on negotiating agreements for authors. And we'll see you at the next in our series. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks,
Bye.
Lisa.
Thank you.